Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast, where on today's show, we're going to be going over another defeat on the road. Dan, this time away at Brighton. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? We were fifth at half time, and then we was all thinking what might have been. But yeah, back down to 13th we go, which we seem to be there for weeks at the moment.
Well, I mean, for weeks, we kind of lingered around that position basically since we've been in the Prem, bar that second season. But it is so tight. It's incredibly tight. Like, a couple of results here and there could really swing it. And that's why I said sort of last week, we are kind of one away win from really kind of flipping the script, but we just can't seem to get it just yet. I mean, bar West Ham, I don't think we've looked massively convincing in any of the games. It was really reminiscent of Sunderland. But we're going to get into it. Remember, before we get going, to drop a comment down below, subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels, follow us on the socials, at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. And if you missed any of the episodes that we posted over the international break, the special episode with Pontus Jansson, which was amazing in every single way. And then also I did an episode with Tim Vickery around Igor Thiago and Gustavo Nunes, who I think we're going to talk both about today, potentially, and whether Igor Thiago in particular has a chance of getting into a Brazil squad before the World Cup. Check that out if you haven't already. Some good feedback on both of those episodes. Let's just get straight into Brighton, Dan, because I feel like there's a lot to talk about. Initial thoughts.
Like you said, frustrating. The league's so tight this season. It feels like there's an opportunity there to, if a team goes on a really good run, to, break into that top 5 or 6 and try and get yourself a bit of a buffer, because even a lot of the top teams, or all of the top teams apart from Arsenal, quite inconsistent this season. So for the neutral, it's really interesting, but our away form is really holding us back. I don't think either side are at their best, but ultimately we didn't do enough to win it or even draw the game in the end, which is the frustrating thing. So I thought, especially in that first half, Brighton were there for the taking a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think we were chatting just before we started recording, and I don't think it was kind of either end of an extreme. I thought we were good in the first half, not much more than that. I thought we were pretty bad in the second half, but Brighton were much better than we were to kind of flip the game. But we'll talk about the lineup, because we've had a couple of questions in around the way that we set up, particularly with Keith Andrews. And Ash is asking on Twitter, why are we playing Ayer at left back when we have three left backs on the bench? I think that's a particularly important point, because when you see, Hickey, Rico and Keane Lewis-Potter, I know Keane Lewis-Potter plays a bit further up, and he actually came on at left wing on Saturday. It's not a slight on Ayer, because I think he's been good so far at left back, but I just think, I mean, would you have gone with Hickey? Would you have gone with Rico? Would you have gone with Keane? What do you reckon?
I would have gone with Hickey. I think Rico's unlucky to have played as little as he has, because he's the one that's really not got a look in at all in any of the league games this season. And I think he's better than that. On the few occasions he has played since coming back from injury, especially this season, he's looked strong, and he'll get up and down that left-hand side, even if the final product isn't as good. I think Ayer sometimes at left back can look a little bit awkward. It's the whole having the right footer at left back, which England kind of had at the Euros last summer. I just think it looks a bit clunky at times, and he may not be able to really get up and down that left-hand side as well as a natural left footer maybe could. And like you said, it's not on him. I still think Hickey's a long-term option there, and I would be surprised if we didn't see Hickey come in that position after not too long. But yeah, someone like Rico sitting on the bench thinking, how am I going to get into this team because a right back's playing ahead of me? And then, Aaron Hickey, he's probably well aware that Aaron Hickey's probably a bit ahead of him in the pecking order as well.
I was chatting to Kieran Maguire for the Brighton preview before the game, and he was talking about how high Brighton's fullbacks were pushing up. So far this season, they're more like wingers than they are fullbacks. And I just thought, for what Rico Henry gives you, although he doesn't give you a lot in the final third in terms of quality, like genuine quality, he does give you width, and he does give you support for the left winger. And he's always flying up and down that left-hand side. So I thought, to not even see him come on, I thought was quite surprising. But I mean, should we talk a little bit about the first half? As I mentioned, I didn't think we were amazing. I thought we were better than them. And in the grand scheme of things, I mean, if you look at the first half in isolation, I think it's a pretty decent away performance, would you say?
Yeah, it was a bit dull, and that's not always a bad thing away from home, to keep the opposition out and to keep it a tight game. And then when you take your big moment and they don't, then you can consider that a good half and a good job. I thought the conditions for both teams, just in terms of the weather that day, was bad. I think it probably had a little bit of an impact on the game, but yeah, it wasn't the best game. But it was the type of half where, you know, too often we probably go in one down, and we're the team that go in one down in those situations. So, you know, you could have sat there at half time being pretty happy that we took our moment. But then, of course, Brighton did change things at half time, and we just didn't really react to that.
In terms of the goal, I think we'll kind of rattle through the match action. I think there's more to talk about in terms of the bigger picture stuff. But in terms of the penalty, it's nice to see Thiago kind of. I mean, do you remember that there was that tweet after, I can't remember what game, the Newcastle game, when he scored another brace, and someone said it's weird that I still don't think he's very good. But I do think, and I understand why people say that he's a bit clunky, in the same way that Michael Coyote is a little bit clunky. But, you know, aesthetics isn't everything. However, against Brighton, despite the penalty miss, which we'll talk about, I did think he was probably our best player and cut a bit of an isolated figure. But even with that, I thought he was a real handful for their centre halves, and probably why Hertzler switched it at half time. But I just thought his build up for the penalty was really nice. That little flick, it's nice to see his all round game getting better.
Yeah, brilliant, and that's what I want to see from him. You know, like I said before, every striker at Brentford over the years seems to have been in the position to get the goals. I think the way we play, you know, will allow him to get goals, but I think more important, especially in terms of getting us up the pitch, which sometimes we struggle to do, we need that focal point, and I think he's becoming that. And yeah, that flick was brilliant. His all-round game is really good now. I understand what people mean. He looks a little bit unnatural at times. You'll get the odd touch or the odd finish where he just doesn't look like it comes naturally to him. But, you know, he clearly works hard. He's motivated. He loves being at Brentford, and I really felt for him at the end when he did miss that second one. But, you know, you can't complain with what he's given us this season. You know, 9 goals now, only behind Haaland. And I don't even think it's that close between him and whoever's behind him. I think it might be Welbeck actually on about 7. So, you know, I don't think any of us expected him to have this total by November. And, you know, keeping him fit is really key, because I think that would be the most important player that we can't lose at the moment, because I imagine that we'd really struggle if someone else is playing that central role and trying to do what he does now.
Well, I mean, we can talk about kind of where we'll reinforce in January, if we'll reinforce in January. But I think we've mentioned on the pod before that Thiago, or the striker position, is one that we're going to look at. We also heard, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, that Fabio Carvalho has done his ACL.
Never going to get in the team, is he? I feel for him. He's never going to get in the team.
It's really bad, that. I mean, when that popped up on my phone, I put an immediate message group just saying, "What the fuck?" Like, we, despite not having many injuries this season, we've now had Josh De Silva do his ACL in training and Fabio Carvalho do his ACL in training, and particularly with Fab, it's a sickener for him, really. I mean, Keith's comments, even like when he had his presser and he said, you know, he's not really been given the minutes that he deserves. That is putting it lightly, in my opinion, because like he didn't deserve to come on at Fulham when we were 3-1 down and we had 5 minutes on. You don't deserve that kind of treatment as a player. And, you know, there's been a few things that we criticize Andrews for. We're going to get onto his in-game subs as well. But I do think his treatment of Fabio Carvalho is near the top of the pile for me, because I just think, especially if you're looking at it in January, and we can chat about Damsgard as well, we are a little bit light in that number 10 position, and we are a little bit light at number 9 too. I know that Jensen's been coming on to kind of replace Damsgard at points, and we'll get into Damsgard being replaced as well. But I mean, at half-time on Saturday, Dan, I understand that we're not going to make any changes if we're winning, but Hertzler did, obviously losing. I don't think I can't say that Keith Andrews would have done the same if we were losing at halftime. I'm not really seen a manager ring the changes at halftime since we've been in the Premier League under Thomas Frank or Keith Andrews. But it did feel like, I don't know what it was. I don't know what he said at halftime, but it felt like, right, we've got the goal. We're going to sit back and we're going to try and hit him on the counter. Instead of, in my opinion, you know, realizing that, as you said, Brighton weren't at their best. We were better in the first half. Could we have not done more to kind of come out in the second and really impose ourselves on the game? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Thomas Frank did make changes at halftime this weekend. That shows how bad Tottenham were against Arsenal. But I think they obviously changed their shape. It allowed them to dominate possession in midfield, and I feel like we're repeating ourselves this season. We just don't keep the ball well enough. It's very, very rare that we dominate the midfield in a game and we keep the ball really well. You're probably looking at our games against the promoted sides in the last couple of years as the only kind of examples where we've done that quite well and dominated that aspect of the game. And we really need to improve in that area. And I think it's a weird one because, the likes of Damsgard, Henderson and Yarmo as individuals, you don't think that they would struggle with that sort of thing. Henderson particularly would have played in Liverpool sides who would have dominated possession in most games. But for whatever reason, it hasn't clicked. It's never really been something that's clicked for our time in the Premier League, to be honest. You're looking back at the Championship games, Championship years, last time we really dominated the ball. And I don't think it is our intention to drop back in that second half. But I think as they get more possession, as they start to dominate that possession, then I think it's almost something that we naturally do. Don't concede, get men behind the ball, soak up the pressure, and hopefully eventually that period of pressure will end. And for a period it looked like it was working. Danny Welbeck blazed one over, but we didn't really give much else away clear cut until the goals. So you could say it was working to an extent, but you can't do that for 45 minutes. They're going to score eventually. It's too long.
For me, I think that Welbeck chance, that's for me when you make the changes, because that's the warning. And to kind of, it's so frustrating. I made a video on it and I said, when the momentum is flipping and you're losing control of the game, not that we were ever really in control of the game in the first half, but we were defending well and we didn't give up any chances. But that's the warning when Danny Welbeck has that chance, because he should score and the form he's in, you'd expect him to score. But that happens on 60 minutes and we bring on Keane Lewis-Potter at 65. I don't know what it is, but I just think at that point you're waiting to concede, and you don't make any changes to disrupt the flow of the game or to just bring a bit more energy in midfield or at left back where Minter was giving Ayer a torrid time and where the goal ends up coming from as well. It's just he just needs to, especially away from home, and it's hard to criticize him at home because of the caliber of teams we've played, and Burnley's going to be a different kind of test for him. But I just felt like at that point, make the subs because you're going to concede, and once one goes in, the second one can follow.
We don't seem to have a plan B. I mean, I think it's almost hard to know what to do in those situations where they are dominating the ball. Is bringing on Vitali gonna really change things in terms of keeping the ball more in midfield? Those options are just a little bit like for like. I get the thing about changing the left back, getting a more natural left back on the field, but I think it's just more of a tactical issue that we've got, and we've never been good enough at just trying to keep the ball a little bit more, play through the lines rather than relying on going long. We're not getting the best out of Damsgard as a result, and we are just allowing the other team to have more of the ball. And when we're not quite on it, they have more and more pressure, and it is probably quite hard to arrest that slump. Keith Andrews isn't going to go to a back five again. He'll get absolutely slaughtered if he did so. So it's really difficult to know exactly what he could have done, but we clearly didn't react to what they did, and we had no sort of plan B to react if they changed something.
I'm not saying it's all on Andrews, because I do think, and we'll touch on the kind of players and how sloppy we were in possession. Hendo in particular in the second half, it really reminded me, that compilation when England played Croatia in the World Cup. Yeah, the World Cup in 2018. Or was that the Euros? Semi-final. Yeah. And it reminded me of that compilation where, like, every time Hendo was in a bit of space, he just fucking whacks it over the top. It was a little bit like that watching the game back, because every time we got the ball, Hendo's looking for the long ball. But that's why I'm saying it's not on Andrews solely, because the players have to realise that every time we're going long, we're just gifting them possession back and inviting the pressure back towards us. And as we're doing that, we're dropping deeper and deeper and deeper into our own half. But that's where I'm saying, as well as the players, Andrews has to realise that and say, right, well, what do I change? And it's not up to us to say what he needs to do. But I think everyone could have seen that in that moment, or at least after they got the first, we can't not make another change until, what was it, 80 minutes? We bring on Keane Lewis-Potter at 65. And we don't make another change, and we're looking at 10 minutes of the game now.
I'm not a fan of Keane Lewis-Potter in the front three still. You've got Reiss Nelson there. Surely you'd bring Reiss Nelson on over Keane Lewis Potter. And again, Kevin Schade, I wasn't convinced by him. Surely, like, why is he continually playing 90 minutes? Surely he should be brought off sometimes. Dango did more, I think, than Schade in that game. But Dango's the one.
I thought Dango.
Well, he won the penalty. He made a few runs. I mean, it's not a high bar. Granted, it's not a high bar.
Wasn't. They were both pretty poor. They were both pretty poor.
But Dango is always the one that gets subbed. And Schade is always the one that gets away with it and plays 90 minutes when I don't think that's justified. Schade does not fill me with confidence at all, especially when we're down, especially when we're not playing well. I've got more confidence that Dango will do something in those situations than Kevin Schade will suddenly just come out of his slump and do something. Because, we've seen enough of these sorts of games from Kevin Schade now, and I just don't think it justifies him just being one of those players that doesn't get substituted.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry on Twitter said, if Carvalho is fit, would he still be sitting on the bench alongside Nelson too? And, I think when the announcement was made that we were going to sign Nelson, I know it was in the midst of us thinking we were going to get more signings on deadline day, and we ended up just getting Reiss Nelson from Arsenal on loan. But I still thought that's a good signing. Like, to have a player of his caliber being able to come off the bench, being able to start, if he ever does start in the league, which I don't think he will. But what's the point of that loan being? Because he's been injured, and then
he looks good. He looks good when he plays.
Exactly, he looks good when he plays, but he never fucking plays. So I don't know. We'll talk about Nelson because we've got another question about Burnley and whether he should maybe come into the starting lineup. I think he should, in my opinion, but I don't think he will. Off the basis of what we've seen so far this season. But I mean, can we talk a little bit about Brighton's goals? I think I've seen Collins getting a lot of stick for Welbeck's goal. I'm in the camp of that's just a really good cross and really good movement from Welbeck. Do you think Collins should be doing better there?
It is. It is a really good goal, really good cross, really good finish. And obviously Danny Welbeck's really experienced. He's in form. He knows what he's doing. Collins, though, this season has a habit of switching off at times. And, maybe we can judge him because he's got that history this season. So, he's obviously looking at the ball. He's obviously waiting for the cross to come in, and he's lost Welbeck. He doesn't even realise that he's gone. So, yeah, maybe he could have done better. I think that's more of the concern, that we know that he already has moments in games where he switches off, where he's a bit sloppy. We saw it against Crystal Palace. We're seeing it, especially away from home, it feels like this season. And he just needs to really focus on just remaining on it, especially if we are under pressure for such long periods. He can't afford to just switch off for a second.
I think it would be a good point to talk about Sepp, because I thought he is and he has been our better centre half this season. I don't think there's much debate if Collins is at his best and if Sepp's at his best, who the better centre half is, in my opinion. But I think Sepp. And maybe this is a good point to talk about the post-match interviews as well, because I think that riled up a lot of Brentford fans, because you couldn't, and like the social media team must have seen Keith's interview, then did Sepp's interview as well, and just been like, there could not be more of a stark contrast between those two interviews, in which Keith Andrews basically beating around the bush, saying, we were gritty, we were resilient, and to an extent, I understand why he has to say that. But then Sepp comes out and his hands are in his head's in his hand, saying we were terrible in the first half, we were terrible in the second half. And that's for me, that's kind of what you want. You kind of want to say it how it is, and everyone's disappointed. And I get it, and I understand why Keith Andrews has to be kind of opposite in that situation. But you could tell that Sepp was really pissed off with the way that game went. And I don't blame him, because I don't know what my question is here, Dan, but I think without question, would you say that Sepp so far has definitely been levels above Collins so far this season?
He's more consistent. There's no glaring errors that you get from Collins. He doesn't seem to, switch off. He's not at maybe the highest level, but again, him and Collins are both very young. They'll both hopefully improve over the next few years, and this is a place for him to do that. Sepp's come into Brentford with less first team football than Nathan Collins had. I know he'd had a few loans, but I think he might have had 1 year in the Bundesliga, and then before that was in the Championship. So he's not had that Premier League experience prior to coming to Brentford. No, I think he's done pretty well, and I think he'll only grow in that position. I agree with the interviews. It's weird. It's very strange to see such a contrast in the player interview and the manager interview. And I don't know if that's something to be concerned about or not. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt for now, but surely Keith isn't then going into the dressing room and being like, unlucky boys, we're all right today. I ultimately thought it was two teams who weren't at their best, and in those situations away from home against a side who's not performing to the levels they normally do, you want to be taking something from the game. So I'm probably more inclined to agree with Sepp. A lot of the playing out from the back does start with Collins and Vandenberg as well, and there's a lot of sideways passing, and as soon as we get it into midfield, we seem to lose it. So they need to work on that as well, I think.
100%. I think, and to be fair, I don't think we've not looked kind of shaky playing out from the back. I don't think Kelleher looks a lot better with his feet than he did at the start of the season. I think Sepp is comfortable in possession. Collins sometimes needlessly gives the ball away, but the way that we build, it's reliant on someone coming to get the ball. Normally Jordan Henderson, but on Saturday it was like whenever Jordan Henderson got the ball, it was a ball over the top, and then we're kind of just piling up the pitch through Thiago and through Dango and through flicks. And there wasn't many. I mean, building through the middle of the pitch has been a problem for us. We'll talk about Damsgard. I've got Hinshelwood's winner. Any complaints? I think Hickey should probably get out a bit faster to Minter, but I mean, Minter's been a really good player so far, and Hickey was out on the razz with Scotland in the week, so I don't blame him for being a little bit off the pace. But Thiago's pen miss. Do you want to talk about your tweet a little bit? I've seen some people saying, personally, I would never give it to someone else. Or I would never let the same person take two penalties in the same match. And I just think, well, if he scores, or if Jensen takes it and Jensen misses, then everyone's saying, well, why the hell did we let Thiago take it? He scored 9 goals already. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. First of all, with Hinshelwood, where I'm on the verge of adding him to the random list of players that always seem to score against Brentford, because he's popped up before and he doesn't score very many.
No.
He can join Mason Mount and Harry Wilson and Harley Barnes. Yeah, it's a random list of players, and I'm still intrigued to know whether other teams have such a random list of just people that always score against them. Anyway, penalty. I agree. Thiago has to take it. Your best penalty taker has to take the penalty at any given point. Whenever the penalty is given, they have to take it. Doesn't matter if it's their first or their fifth in the game, unless they've missed the previous 4, perhaps. But you get the gist. My issue with Thiago's penalties, and I know you're someone, Mike, who says that if it goes in, it can't be a bad penalty. But if for example that his first one this season against Forest was saved, it was almost the same penalty as this one. He has done his default penalty is kind of through the middle, not too much power, pretty low. It's probably a nice one if the goalkeeper knows it's coming. It's a nice one for the goalkeeper to save. Very rarely do his penalties go into the corner, and particularly when you're taking a second one in the game, I think he probably may have planned ahead. Say, if I get a penalty against Brighton, this is what I'm going to do with it. But if you get a second one, you might not plan for that, and you probably go for your default penalty.
Yeah.
And as fans, we shouldn't know what his default penalty is, because if we know, that means the Brighton keeper knows. And in my view, he just needs to vary it a lot more. I think Harry Kane's done that since he had that second penalty against France in the World Cup. I think since then he's varied his penalties a lot more. Like, he has a stutter run up sometimes not. Whereas before it was always that top left, wasn't it, with Harry Kane, and everyone knew that was his default penalty. Whereas now you don't know that so much. And I think Thiago needs to vary his finishes from the penalty spot a little bit more, and maybe needs to try and aim for the corners a little bit more, because every time you roll it just down kind of the middle, I know it was slightly off center, but it was basically the middle, you run the risk of looking like an idiot if the keeper reads you and just kind of dives slightly to the right and picks it up with relative ease, and it will get called a bad penalty, particularly when you're doing the stutter. And the whole purpose of the stutter is to wait for the keeper to move and then roll it in the other side. But it didn't look like he was doing that. So that's all I'd say to him. He's done well this season. I really do feel for him for missing that at the end. I know how disappointed he would have been, and I know how happy he would have been. We know what he's like if he had scored in the last minute there. But I do think, just in future, I shouldn't know where he likes to go with penalties, and he needs to vary a little bit more.
I agree. I think he needs to lift it first of all. He's not lifted any of the penalties so far. He's just rolled it along the ground. I want
Yeah.
him. I want to see him rattle one, top bins, side Benrahma, Loftus Road style. That's what I want to see next. Literally,
The second one, just smashing the second one would have been like last minute pressure situation. Just absolutely lever it because yes, the keeper might be expected to do that, but it's a lot harder to say. Even if the keeper guesses right, if you're smashing that and it's high, it's every chance the keeper gets something to it, but it still goes in. So yeah, disappointed for him. Obviously, there's a big wait again between the penalty being given and it being taken, but I think we've got to expect that these days. The likes of Jensen, takes care of the ball and just gives it to him when it's ready. But yeah, disappointed for him, but needs to work on them a little bit.
Not in the running order, but what are we saying if Thiago does score the penalty and it's a 2-2 draw? How are we viewing? I mean, I think first of all we're saying we take a point, but how are we viewing the performance? Are we still a little bit annoyed with the second half showing? I think we are, to be honest. I know people would be like, well, that's just reactionary, but I would still be saying on the basis of the first half that it's 2 points dropped rather than a point gained. And I think, it's 3 points dropped on this occasion. What do you reckon?
You'd be saying it was a good penalty in the last minute. Yes, I think there was always an opportunity for 3 points in this game. I didn't think Brighton were at their best either, particularly first half. So in that situation, even if we had drawn the game, the reality still would have been that Brighton weren't at their best. And I think in those situations away from home, when we don't win as many away games as it is, that's an opportunity to get 3 points. And, we don't have the best record away at Brighton in the Premier League. And it would have been a really good opportunity. And obviously we saw at half time the difference it would have made to our league position and the whole feeling going into a game against Burnley next week that we might be expected to win. So, yeah, I still think I would have been a bit disappointed. But also at that stage of the game, in the circumstances that we might have got a point in, you would have also been grateful for the point because it looked like we wouldn't have anything a few minutes before that.
Should we? I mean, we've touched on Hendo. We've talked about Sepp. We've talked about Collins. I thought it was Dango's worst performance in a Brentford shirt. I still think he was worse than Sharda was. But as you said, the bar was quite low for the players.
He won the penalty. He won the penalty. I think he made one other decent run up the right-hand side before then. And to me, that's still more of an impact than Sharda had on the game because I don't think Sharda did much at all. Obviously, he won the second penalty, you could say, but,
that was dubious for me. I think it was soft. That was given against us. I'll be fuming. But there was a moment, and if there was ever an action to sum up Kevin Sharda, it was in the first half. Ball comes to him. Does a lovely little turn to spin his man, uses his pace to get him beyond, breaks into their final third, and then just passes straight to Brighton fullback in a promising situation. And it was just like, that is, and I know we talk about Sharda every week, and I don't want to go too heavy on him. I think we had a few comments on the last video saying you guys are always slating Sharda, and I'm aware of that, but also at the same time, we need to see the consistency. We so need to see that consistency. And for the, sounded like a complete broken record, but that sequence, he has all the quality to be a top forward, but it's just that final bit. It's just that final pass, or it's just that first touch. It's just that part that he can't just quite get hold on.
When I say he should be on the bench for a game or two, I actually think out of all our attacking players, he'd be the most effective coming off the bench with 20, 30 minutes left because he's got that pace and power. And against a tiring defence, him being completely fresh, I think, that's not going to be something the opposition look over and think, oh, great. I highly doubt they were very worried when Keane Lewis-Potter came on. But when if Sharda was to come off the bench, then, it would give them something different to think about. And at the very least, he's got that pace. It gives them something to worry about. And I think he'd be quite good off the bench, maybe more so than Nelson. I think it might be better to have Nelson from the start and Sharda coming on.
I think as well, if you look back at our best performance from last season under Thomas Frank, I at least thought it was Newcastle at home, and Kevin Sharda came off the bench and he scored a goal and he was a menace and he just terrorised their defenders when they were leggy. This is a really strong argument to say that he should be a bench option, because when he does come on, he's so fresh and he's so quick that he's going to cause the tired defence problem. So I think we've kind of answered someone's question already. Archie on Twitter was saying Sharda or Nelson for Burnley. I would chuck Nelson in from the start, but
he won't, but I would as well.
He won't. He won't. He absolutely won't. I'd be very, very surprised if Keith did chuck him in from the start, because his faith in Sharda seems to be unwavering. Even when he's not playing well, he's irreplaceable, it seems, from the bench.
And I would say as well, just when Brighton do go 2-1 up, why is Keith Andrews not immediately bringing him on? Why are we not just throwing the dice, getting more attacking players off on the pitch and just really going for it? Because we didn't create much else apart from the penalty, which, like you said, was dubious. The cross was going out. It wasn't going to lead to a goal scoring opportunity if the penalty wasn't given. So it just comes back to the argument we've said so many times that when you need a goal, and then again, it doesn't fill me with confidence when we need a goal and like Yanelt comes on. I just don't feel like he's going to make the difference in that way. It's not to say he's a bad player, but we just need that creativity on the pitch. And again, Damsgard wasn't on the pitch towards the end when we needed a goal, and yes, he wasn't great again, but I still would back him. If you get him the ball in the right areas, he's more likely to create something than any of the players that came on.
Damsgard did create a chance but it was actually, he gave the pre-assist for what would have been a goal if Dango buried it for Sharda, who crossed it across the edge of the box, and Watara was just a little bit on his heels. I think if he telegraphs that pass coming across, I think maybe that's the game done and dusted there, because he can get across his marker and just plant it in the back of the net. But you've given me a nice segue into Damsgard. We've had a few questions about him. Tommy on Twitter was asking, how do we get Damsgard more involved? I did some digging on the numbers, and I had a look at Damsgaard's heat map from this season and last season. He's by and large receiving the balls in the same places. He's by and large having the same amount of touches. I'm now in, and I understand that we are, actually no, because we're playing about as much direct football as we were under Thomas Frank last season. But for some reason, Damsgard is just not having the effect on games that he was having last season, which leads me to say that I'm not more in the camp of it being more on Damsgard, but I do think he has to shoulder some of the responsibility here, because even against Brighton, even against Newcastle, when he gets on the ball, he just hasn't looked, I don't know, he's not looked as potent in the final third or in the middle third of the pitch when he's kind of stringing passes together or looking to send someone over along. His passes aren't getting there. He's not being able to get past players. And if you look at his stats per 90 compared to last season, like he was in the 90th percentile plus for all of the attacking metrics and all of the defensive metrics. If you look at him this season, he's only doing the defensive work now, which is still, credit to him for his size and his stature, but for him to still be able to kind of win the ball back and make tackles and interceptions, fair enough. But we're not seeing that kind of attacking level that we saw last season. What's your take on Dams?
Oh, I think I said before, relationships with Brian and Wissa, he played with them for a long time. It wasn't clicking quite between them at the beginning, but last season, obviously it was. And, it might just naturally take him some time to know where to put the ball for this front three. And you could also perhaps argue that this front three might not quite be on the same level, particularly, Mbumo to Dango. I think the fact that we do feel a bit more direct this season can bypass him at times, which obviously that wouldn't be on him. But yeah, he also does have to take responsibility. It's easier again to look good in games where we're the better team and we're controlling things and you're getting on the ball more. But in games where you don't have so many chances, you need to make those moments count. Could he come deeper to help us try and get more on the ball in periods when we're under pressure? I wouldn't want him to do that all the time, but in periods where it's very clear that we're just really struggling to get out, can he come a bit deeper and just collect the ball and try and help us? Because he's still the one for me that if you get him on the ball, he's more likely to do something than anyone else. Maybe Jordan Henderson as well, but he does it from, he has like his one signature kind of pass over the top, whereas Damsgard can do it in more different ways. And I think, he's still one of our most important players. Even if he's not at his best, I can still see him producing something. And, I think that may have held him back at times. He gets hooked nearly every game, it seems like. And, particularly in games where we need a goal, And I'm not sure he came off when we were losing in this game, but I think you need him on the pitch, and he's not always there. But room for improvement, definitely. Not as good as last season, but he's still in our top 3 or 4 important players, I think.
I think as well. I think Saturday is a big game for Damsgard because, and we'll touch on it. I want to get to some questions from the listeners first, but we'll talk about Burnley. But it does feel like it's going to be a different kind of game for Keith so far in terms of playing one of those teams that may sit in. We may have to be a bit more reliant on someone of Damsgaard's quality to kind of unlock that defense. But even just thinking about it off the top of my head, Damsgaard's standout games, and there were many, many, many standout games for him last season. But what comes to my mind would be the Wolves game at home when Wolves were particularly poor, the Leicester game at home when Leicester were particularly poor, and he shone and he really stood out in those games. So could be a big game for Damsgard on Saturday. Let's talk about some questions before we go on to the game on Saturday. MKW Ultra on Twitter is saying, Keith's definitely stumbled across a formation that worked a couple of times for him, and now he assumes it's the best one for every match. Brighton stayed so compact the entire game, and we just hoofed it down the middle. Didn't use Damsgard or the wings properly. I think this is a bit harsh, to be honest. I mean, everyone was slating him for the formations, and I think everyone was saying if he now goes back to a back 5. I don't know what he means. MKW Ultra, if you could let us know in the comments or clarify what you mean by he stumbled across a formation that worked a couple of times for him, and now he assumes it's the best one for every match. If Keith were to change formation now, after all of the stick he was getting at the start of the season when we were playing in a 5 and it not working, I think he would get slaughtered personally.
I wouldn't be playing 5 away at Brighton, but I do think he's maybe risk averse at times still, even with his substitutes. I don't think he's a big fan of just taking a real risk to try and change a game. Maybe late on, even to move into a more attacking formation. Thomas Frank wasn't the most risky manager we've ever had, but even he would throw on attackers, towards the end of some games where we need to win. To the extent where, sometimes he'd go to a kind of a back 5, but you'd have like 2 wingers at wing back, and it'd be like more of an offensive, maybe a central midfielder as one of the back 3. And he would try and do a little bit more to change the game and get all your best attacking players on the pitch. And I think that's where Keith Andrews disappoints me most in terms of just not taking that risks. Like I said, if you need a goal and the opposition are looking over and you got Ian out and Lewis Potter coming on, they're not going to be, overly concerned that much is going to change.
I really think that risk averse point is something that is really stopping a certain part of the fan base from getting fully on board with Keith. And I'll fully back the manager, right? I will back the manager, but that is one thing that he could do. He could have done in this game: ring the changes, make some changes, stop the momentum of the game, or throw on our best attackers. And that way, it's a way to appease the fans. And I get, he's in a position to try and win points, not appease the fans. But I do feel like the subs, whenever we post something or whenever we do a full-time tweet, every single tweet or every single reply that we get, and I didn't include one of them, but it was like something like, please explain this Bella and substitutions. But every single thing is about subs. It's all about subs. And we've gone from a manager who wasn't very risk averse in Thomas Frank to a manager who seems even less risk averse in Keith Andrews. But I do just think if he was to make some changes, get Nelson on the pitch, maybe bring, and pains me to say it because I know we've talked about Romel Donovan, but maybe put Donovan on a bench, maybe put Nunes on a bench, see what they can do. Because at the moment we've got 3 left backs on the bench. Left back's not going to win you points when we're losing. They're not going to win you points when we're losing, and we are losing a lot away from home. And it just feels like if Brentford have been known this season for dropping points from winning positions and not retrieving points from losing positions, then there is a problem with his in-game subs. And I just feel like he needs to, for him to get that full buy-in from the majority of the fan base, he needs to start using his subs better. And I think, what would you reckon?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think even when he does bring the attacking players off, it's often at the expense of another. It's often at the expense of Damsgard or Dango, or, even at times Thiago's come off a couple of times. And I just don't get it at all, because, we are a team who a lot of that the usual starting 11 haven't really scored for Brentford. Like Coyote's never scored for Brentford, Jarmo's never scored for Brentford, obviously Henderson's never scored for Brentford yet. I don't think Sepp scored for Brentford. So you are quite reliant on the front line. Jensen is the only one, that comes on pretty regularly and will pop up with a goal. Obviously Fabio used to do that with the limited minutes he had. So, we've got to be bringing more offensive players on, bring Nelson on, but, have a front four. Why not at that stage in the game? What's the worst that's going to happen? And I think that's the frustration. Just really go for it towards the end and put them under pressure.
We have another question from Tommy on Twitter. He says, "Is it time to freshen up the starting 11? Understand why Aya gets picked at left back against the likes of Salah and Minter, but do we need someone more forward thinking there?" I think we've kind of already answered that. And he said, "Would Jensen add some much needed craft and guile in midfield?" What do you reckon? Is it time to start maybe making the changes? Because he has settled on a strongest 11 of sorts. I think at least the only change he really has started to make is at left back. But I don't think he will. That's the thing. Like, we have no evidence of him changing the lineup, and I'm not sure it's a thing about changing the starting 11. I think it's more the subs. I'm sounding like a broken record again, but it is more we need to see changes in game as opposed to pre-game. But what do you reckon? Would you like to see any changes against Burnley? I think we've already touched on some, but would you?
I'd have Hickey for Aya. I don't think that's surprising. I do think Jensen deserves a start in the Premier League. I think he's the one that's done quite a bit off the bench in limited minutes, in front of goal as well, helping us get goals, which are too many of our central midfielders do not contribute in that situation. Even Damsgard doesn't contribute enough in that situation. So against a team who we think might be sitting back a bit more, could you have someone like Jensen instead of Yarmo maybe, who will be a little bit more creative, who will play the sort of passes that Henderson might play as well, and might even pop up in front of goal with the goal involvement. So I wouldn't mind seeing Jensen there, but like you said, I don't think we'll see many changes. I think we might see a change at left back, but I'm not sure we'll see anything else. And then obviously Reiss Nelson for Kevin Schade is something I'd do as well. So they're the three potential changes. I can probably already see him making one, if any, though.
Jensen for Yarmo, do you think?
I would say so. I don't think you can drop Henderson just for what he gives you in terms of leadership as well. But if Henderson, doesn't always get through the 90 minutes if he's tiring towards the end, someone like Yarmo maybe could come in, depending on if we need a more defensive type there, or if we are in control of the game where we can have a bit more of creativity and engine in the midfield. Jensen, I think, can do it. He's not played a lot of football. I would suspect he probably wouldn't play 90 minutes if he started, so Yarmo would probably just come on for him. But I think he might just give us that bit more creativity from the start, and he should still be able to get around and work hard.
Let's talk a little bit about Burnley then. Ahead of Arsenal and Spurs away, it feels like we need 3 points really. I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a different kind of game for Keith in terms of what we faced at home so far this season, in terms of what we faced. Well, yeah, no, at home, because we played West Ham, so we played some bad teams away from home. But it does. Do we think Burnley are going to come to the Gtech and try and kind of sit in, cause a problem for us on the counter, or do you kind of think Scott Parker, the twat, might come with a different game plan?
He could have been our manager, couldn't he? He was one of the favourites in pre-season.
That would have been suicide.
They're not as bad as people might think they are. I think apart from Wolves, nobody's that bad this season in the Premier League, but they do clearly lack quality going forwards, and I think their strength is defence. So I think they'd be silly not to try and keep it tight first and foremost in an away game against a team who've got a good record at home, which we do. So I do think they'll probably have that defence first mindset, but I do think they'll create a few chances. I still think it's a game that we really should be looking at winning this one. I think if they beat us, they might be 3 points behind us. Whereas if we win, we maintain that gap between us and the bottom three. So it's a big game. I'm looking at what we've got coming up. And it's a sort of game that in the last couple of years, particularly last season, that we did really well in. and
battered,
that we were able to be really dominant, and you could really see the difference between us and like a newly promoted side. So it's a challenge for key fans. There's no reason we can't be confident at home. There's no reason we can't do it. You know, we've played a lot of teams at home this season who are very, very good, and you know, Burnley just won't be the same quality. So, you know, we might have to be patient, but you know, we need to go into this game with a mindset that we need to control this game. We need to dictate this game. We don't need to, you know, really think too much. I don't think about how they're going to play. I think we need to be the ones who step up and take control. Whereas in a lot of games this season, even at the Gtech, Keith's probably been in a position where he can more plan to counter the opposition. Whereas we need to step up and take control in this one. And then obviously, Arsenal away after. Can't see us getting anything there in a million years. Although Spurs away, just maybe. Who knows?
Spurs away looks terrible. I tweeted there would be something really, really amazing about potentially being the manager to end Thomas Frank's tenure. I don't know if he will still even be at Spurs. I think I read it.
For him. I really do feel for him. But they were absolutely terrible against Arsenal.
Yeah, they were dog shit. Yeah. But I just think you know, I think I read in the Telegraph that Matt Law was saying that they've got no plans to change him. But I mean, that kind of display in a North London derby is that's not going to do anything.
2 weeks after the Chelsea one, and they're the two games where he's really dropped stinkers.
Yeah, I know, and they're arguably Spurs' most important games of the season. But I mean, they've got PSG next. We could, and then they've got Fulham at home. If they lose against PSG and they lose against Fulham, and he's not sacked before then, and then we go to Tottenham. That is absolutely massive for Thomas Frank, and nothing in this world would give me more pleasure than getting 3 points there. Nothing in this.
I'd love it, but I'd also feel bad for him because you know
I'd feel bad, but I wouldn't really care post match. I mean, if he got sacked, I'd feel bad for him, but it would also be the sweetest kind of. Oh mate, it'd be unbelievable.
If it doesn't work out with Keith, he can come back.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it does feel like a big game. You're right. I think it's going to be a big game for Damsgard. But we'll get more on Burnley with the preview in midweek. Remember, if you haven't already checked out the episodes that we did over the international break, I said at the top of the show with Pontus Jansson and Tim Vickery, then please go and watch those. We've had some great feedback on both of those episodes. Remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts around the Brighton game ahead of the Burnley game. Would you make any changes? Does Schade drop out? Does Nelson come in? Would you like to see Nunes and Donovan on the bench? We didn't really talk about it in too much detail, but I think there'll be a lot of Brentford fans who will see 3 left-backs on the bench and definitely demand some more attacking intent, especially with Fabio Carvalho's injury. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials, at The Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Dan, it's been a pleasure, mate.
Up the bees.